All right, Hebrews 11:1. We're going to jump back in. So, we talked about last week, we began to talk about belief that versus belief in. And we used the analogy of a police officer who is getting shot in the chest. All of a sudden, he can't just believe that his bulletproof vest will protect him. All of a sudden, he has to believe in his bulletproof vest because his life is on the line. So we began to talk about faith. And the four things that I want to talk about with faith is what is faith? And we got about halfway through that. Where does faith come from? What does faith cost us? And what is the power of faith? So we began in Hebrews 11:1. Now faith is the assurance or substance of things hoped for, the conviction or evidence of things not seen. So we talked about the substance of things hoped for, and we established that it means that we are built on a firm foundation. Our faith is solid, firm, and it's built on an absolute expectation, not a kind of pessimistic hope. So now let's look at the other side of that verse, the conviction or the evidence of things not seen. Conviction right there, or evidence, is the Greek eligmos, and it means a proof or a test. So what is that? What is a proof? When you proof something, you are examining it intently. So the easiest way to define that would be like proofreading a paper. We've all been to school. We've all been there. You have to do this through college. You're reading a paper when you're proofing it. You're reading a paper and you're examining it for the errors you may have made or for improvements you could make. Hey, I'm not very clear in this section. Let me rework that. Oh, I messed up my punctuation here. Let me fix that. That's what you're doing. You're doing a thorough examination while you're proofing that paper so that when you turn it in, you can hopefully get an A. People literally make a living doing this. They're called editors. You submit a book to them. They read through that thing and they mark that sucker in all kinds of red, give it back to you to correct. You proof something that you want to know everything about. So an editor has something on the line when he's proofing a book. He makes money off that book. Chances are he works for the publishing company and they want that book to sell because the more that thing sells, the more money they make. So when that editor is proofing that book, he is examining it thoroughly because he wants to make sure that there's nothing wrong with that thing. All it takes is one error for it to lose credibility. So a proof, also, there's a few definitions for proof, and I want to look at all three. A proof is something that is used to make certain a fact. So I get that's a weird combination of words. That's NASB kind of language right there, and the word order is weird. But you can give a really easy to understand example of this. Evidence in a courtroom. That's a proof. If the murder weapon is produced and the DNA or the fingerprints on that gun matches the defendant, chances are he's getting indicted because that gun is a proof. That's used in the noun form of this. Or if you use it as an adjective, it's defined as resistant. It's able to withstand something damaging. Weather-proof, wind-proof, water-proof. The way to use that as an adjective would be like the castle walls were proof against the cannon fire of the enemy. That means that after Napoleon beats and batters this wall, it's still standing. The wall was proof. We don't really use the word proof in these ways much anymore outside of like a legal sense, but it is good to know. All of these definitions are amazing, and honestly, all of them could preach. Mike could probably take the definition of the word proof and make like a year-long lesson of it. I'm not that good at that. He's a little bit better than I am, but I am thankful he lets me teach. Once this coffee gets in me, we'll be going real fast. But right here in this context of this verse, it's used as a noun. In this sentence, it's used as a noun. It's a certainty of things unseen. It's used like the word proof, like the gun in the courtroom, the evidence. That's why in the King James it translates it as the evidence of things not seen. It's the proof of things not seen. It is the absolute, undeniable certainty of things not seen. So what is things not seen? This is my favorite Greek word, or Greek, I guess, sentence, 2 words, that I've ever read before. Pragma bleepo. It sounds like an alien from Star Wars. Like, I'm pretty sure Pragma bleepo was in the cantina in episode 4. But what Pragma bleepo means is that it's that which has been or is being done without bodily sight. So if your spouse says, I'm going to go take a shower, and you hear the water running, you know that they're taking a shower, but you can't see it because you're in the living room. That's pragma bleepo right there. We'll have a spelling test on that. But this one, I mean, that's just self-explanatory. It's self-explanatory. Something is happening, but you're not seeing it with your eyes. You have this kind of faith all the time. You can't see that the earth is moving, but you trust that it's rotating around the sun. You trust that the earth is rotating on its axis. You can't feel it. You can't lay down and sprawl out and feel like you're on a tilt-a-whirl, but you know that that's happening because in 12, 13, 16, I don't know, daylight saving time is weird. You're going to see the moon. It's going to get dark. And all of a sudden, in 3-4 months, we're going to be in a new season. It's going to be summer, and we're all going to be miserable because it's going to be hot. So you can't see that happening. You can't see the earth rotating, but you know it's happening because the evidence is there. The proof is there. The seasons are the proof. You can't see combustion happening inside your car engine, but whenever you crank it, you trust that your car is going to move. And you can proof this, affirm this, because your car cranks. Or it can be like some cars I've had, where you just don't have a lot of faith in them. A person cannot see creation and truly believe that there is no higher power. That's in Romans 1, 19 and 20. We're all familiar with that. That even creation itself speaks out that there's something. There's something. It is affirmed by creation itself. They can war against that, and they do. But creation knows that there must be a creator. So the thing is that some of the people that I know that talk about God more than most Christians I know are atheists. To which I've asked them before, and some of them get mad, and some of them just kind of slyly smile at me. I'll say, man, for you not to believe in God, you sure do talk about him a lot. And some of them will smile at me, and some of them want to hit me. But the fact is that inside of us, we know, because creation testifies, that something is out there beyond us. There's some kind of purpose for us. Our purpose is not to eat, drink, and be merry because tomorrow we might die. That is miserable existence. And when you have no purpose to live for, you don't get any higher than that. And so all of a sudden, you're miserable. You're miserable because you have no purpose. But we know as human beings, we know we have purpose. And we know we're supposed to do something. And we know that there's something. So even in the ancient world, you see, the idea of no religion is relatively new. We're talking the last 200 years or so. It started in the 1700s and then it's really took off. But the idea of no religion is relatively new because ancient peoples understood this. There's something out there. And of course, what would they do? They would make their idols. They would make gods. Why do we have so many mythologies from all over the world? Why did every people group have their own gods? Because they knew they had purpose and they knew something or someone was out there. That has nothing to do with any of this. But the fact is that I'm going to try to tie it in. Here we go. If a 8th century Kievan Rus, that's ancient Russia, Slavic people could worship their version of Odin. I don't know his name. I know Perun was their version of Thor. If they can worship that and worship it so devoutly that whenever they're Christianized around 1000 or 1100 AD, that their rituals still exist to this day, what stops us from worshiping God with the same passion? Read up on it sometime on the Slavic countries, the Eastern Europe being Christianized. They resisted it and still do. That's why you'll find in Eastern Orthodoxy there's a lot of strange practices, especially in Russian Orthodoxy, because they had to make so many, they had to meet halfway on so many things because the people just did not want it, but it was forced upon them. Anyway, that has nothing to do with any of this. Let's get back to faith. Sit in history class. So we can sum up the evidence of things not seen, believing the proof of things unseen. So the full verse, I'm going to do this. This is the Stevens translation. Faith is an assured expectation built on a firm foundation, believing the proof of things unseen. I'll say it again. Faith is an assured expectation built on a firm foundation, believing the proof of things unseen. It's something that we are sure of, even though we cannot see it. Ephesians 2:8. Ephesians 2:8. Where does faith come from? Oh, we're making terrible time. Where does faith come from? Ephesians 2:8. I'll read it in the NASB. For by grace you've been saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, it is the gift of God. How does that sound in King James? For by grace are ye saved through faith, and this not of yourselves, it is the gift of God. That's very, very similar. ESV. For by grace you have been saved through faith. And this is not your own doing, it is the gift of God. What about the NIV? For it is by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not from yourselves, it is the gift of God. They're all very, very similar, except for the New Living Translation, which has an agenda. God saved you by his grace when you believed. And you can't take credit for this, it is a gift from God. This is the weakest of all the translations. Notice there's a key word that's left out there. Faith. Faith. The New Living Translation drops faith. And when I read that, I was flabbergasted. So I had to look it up a little bit and kind of figure out what was going on here. And I learned that it omits the faith portion, and most likely it's to accommodate a more Arminianistic view of faith. The New Living Translation is very, very popular in Word of Faith circles, And if faith is pushed onto the divine, which I'm about to argue, instead of being something you drum up of yourself, like a magic Jedi power, then all of a sudden this verse, potentially, if you study it, can invalidate that. So they're like, forget that, we'll drop it. We need some new shoes. So the first 7 verses leading up to this, Paul explains that you had no faith. He calls you dead. Dead men can't do anything. If you don't believe me, there's a graveyard out here. Let's go sit there and try to have a conversation. It's not gonna happen. I took Adea to my grandmother. Me and Adea, my grandmother was our favorite person. It's okay, y'all can tell Faith, she knows. And we went to the graveyard, and Adea had written her a journal of what she had done that week, because Adea really misses Memo. Memo was her favorite. And she was Memo's favorite. But Memo, she would swear she wasn't. But Adea wrote her this out and wrote her everything. And at the end of it, she said, Memo, I know you're gone, but it's okay, because I know that I'm going to get to see you again. And I'll sit by you once we're in heaven. So I'm over here crying, and then she looks at me and she's like, what are you crying for? What's wrong with you? And I'm like, oh, thanks. But what was Memo's response? Nothing. She dead. She dead. Dead men cannot have a relationship with God. They're dead. Dead men cannot confess their sins. They're dead. Dead men cannot repent. They're dead. Dead men cannot, let's take this to the other side. Dead men can't work works of righteousness. They're dead. Dead men cannot drum up enough faith to please God or be saved, because they're dead. All that a dead man can do is rot. I like the way Vodi Balcom says it. I was listening to a sermon of his one time, and he was talking about reaching out for God, and he gave this beautiful explanation of reaching out to God and Adam, kind of like in the Sistine Chapel, where God's reaching down his finger and Adam's coming at him all lazy and naked, and then he gives this big thing about reaching to God, and he's like, hey, you know what you can't do? You can't do that, because dead men don't reach. If dead men reach, we're in a zombie apocalypse and we need shotguns. So if you go to your local morgue and you ask a cadaver to dance, first of all, dude, you're messed up. But second of all, the only way to make that body dance is if an outside force moves it. If you want that cadaver to dance, you're going to have to pick it up and waltz it yourself. And that's super weird. Dead men cannot have faith. Paul establishes that in the first 7 verses here of Ephesians. Dead men can't have faith. You need a regeneration. We'll get there. So there's a bit of a debate on where faith comes from. One of my best friends in the last few years, he's moved back to Texas now. His name was Nathan, and he leaned, of course, I lean more on the Calvinistic side. He leans more on the Arminian side, but we agreed on more than we disagreed on. And one of the things we disagreed on is where faith came from. So I would argue my side, he would argue his side. We would agree to disagree, and then we'd have Chick-fil-A. So everything was fine. Everything settled over the Lord's chicken. But some argue that faith is a direct gift of God, as this verse implies. And then some argue that faith is the tool humanity uses to access grace, which is the gift of God. So which is it? Well, where does faith come from? Do we drum it up and then we get to be saved, or does God give it to us? Well, here we go. We're going to jump in. A bit of the argument that I found is that the Greek grammar proves where the gift points. And they say, people that will argue that we drum up our own faith will say that it points to the word saved. That the salvation is the gift, not the faith. That the Greek context points to salvation. It is a gift in the Greek is rendered neutral, while the word faith is a feminine word. So you have to remember that Greek, Hebrew, ancient languages, English is relatively new invention. All of these languages, especially your Latinized languages, they have two genders, male, female. Y'all probably know that if y'all had to take Spanish class, la versus el. There's differences in the gender. So a toaster might be a female term, but an airport is a male term. So same way in these languages. So words have. So like one of the biggest examples of that translated to English is, for example, in the Proverbs, whenever wisdom is referred to as a woman, she cries out in the streets, seek wisdom, seek her blessings, things of that sort. That's because wisdom was a female word. The closest we probably get in English is naming our cars, because I found that most people name their cars feminine names or like redneck nicknames. Like that's old Diesel there. We nickname our cars too. Faith gets a real cool name, the Silver Bullet for the van. I get a lame name. Mine's the Red Robin. Yeah. She gets like a How You Kill Werewolves, and then I get a fast food hamburger. So, but the fact is that you have those there. So they're saying that since it is a gift, is neutral, it has no gender, that clause has no gender, that it points back to salvation, which is no gender. So, early church fathers, Augustine, Jerome, Chrysostom, they argue that the article refers to the faith. So, it turns out that in the Greek language, a neutral article can point back to any gender of a word. It's universal. It's like the remote that you get at Walmart that's this long with 80 buttons on it. It can work on anything. That's how it is here in Greek. So it can be referring to faith, not just salvation. I'm going to come back to that neutrality here in a minute. So not only that, we must examine the verse in context. Always. You hear me say that always. Mike literally just taught 2 lessons on Jeremiah 29 in context. Context is important always. So when we look at the context of this verse, you find that the preceding 9 verses have made the argument that you're dead in your trespasses. You're dead. You're buried under your sin. And as we've seen, dead men can't do anything. Dead men are dead. It's the very definition of dead. You're ceased from living. Someone that's alive can do something. Someone that's dead can't. And the fact is that you've ceased from humanity. You're not a human being. You're a human was. I thought that was clever. None of y'all did. Editing that out of the video. The verse that immediately follows, Ephesians 2:9, not as a result of works, so that no one may boast. It speaks of faith not being a work. Why? To prevent boasting. How many times in the scripture have we read Paul saying, I will boast in nothing but Jesus Christ and Him crucified? Paul at points would even say, I'm determined to know nothing among you except Christ and Him crucified. I don't even want to know your problems. Let's just deal with the gospel. But if we as men are able to drum up enough faith to believe in God, then, I want to talk about 4 things that happen if we are able to drum up enough faith. 1, it invalidates God's role in salvation, especially in verse 5. Even when we were dead in our transgressions, He made us alive together with Christ. by grace, you have been saved. Where God is credited making us alive in Christ. It doesn't say you've clawed your way out of the grave. It says God made you alive. A dead man can't make himself alive again. You don't see anyone coming out of the graves. Once they go in, we weep because we know they're not coming out again. Of course, until the resurrection. But even then, he's not making himself alive. If we provide the faith, then that means God is not sovereign in salvation. You're going to hear me talk about the word sovereignty a lot because honestly, in and throughout history, a king makes the rules. A king enforces the rules. A king, his word, is the rule. So if God is sovereign, if God is king, then he makes the rules. He dictates the methods. He dictates everything, and we serve him. So I'm big on sovereignty. Secondly, if we can drum up enough faith to believe in God, then all of a sudden, faith is a work. If we are able to provide the faith, then we have brought an action to the table that has, albeit slightly, inherited us earning of God's salvation. I taught this verse one time years and years and years ago and made this argument, and then my preacher at the time, he was super anti-Calvinist. I mean, super anti-Calvinist. And he would always preach against it, like every, sermon twice. And I remember I taught this message, and he amened all through it. And then a few years later, I came back and I was like, "Preacher, did you realize that that's a Calvinist way of thinking?" And he was like, "Yeah, I ain't worried about it." So, if we're able to provide the faith, then we've brought an action to the table. If we swell up the faith that's inside of us, then all of a sudden, God owes us salvation. If I am able to drum up some faith and say, "You know what? Yeah, God, I believe you." That's a work. If we provide the faith, that would mean if we do that, if we drum up the faith inside of ourselves out of human determination, then that means we provide the faith, but God provides the salvation through grace, and it invalidates his sovereignty, and it makes it a work. So that invalidates the fact that you have no merit in yourself and that your righteousness is filthy rags. If you're able to clean those rags, or maybe flip those rags over, make them white on one side, I don't know. If you're able to do that, then all of a sudden you've produced a work. Nextly, if we're able to drum up enough faith to believe in God, then it is cause for boasting, which is exactly what 9 said not to do. If we can drum up faith ourselves, then we have something to boast in aside from Christ and him crucified. I quoted that to you earlier, Galatians 6:14. We can compare and contrast how much faith we had when we were converted. Yeah, I believed better than you did whenever I was saved. I didn't have a problem with the resurrection whenever I confessed. Oh yeah, well, I was 100% sure that the rapture was going to happen immediately after I was saved. That's nuts. All of a sudden, faith becomes a dividing factor instead of a gift we have in common. And all of a sudden, the brotherly love that we're supposed to let continue, and all of a sudden, the unity of the church is broken, because instead of us all saying, "Glory be to God," it's, "I'm better than you." I'm very, very against that. Faith tells me all the time that I put off an aura, like I feel that makes me seem like I'm better than everybody. I'm just confident. I'm not very good at anything, but I'm confident in it, so I can trick you. And but the fact is that if you think you are better, I hate that. I hate that. Maybe it's because I look like it. Lastly, if we can drum up faith, then it invalidates a key word here: gift. A gift is not something that you earn. Wages are something that you earn, which is interesting because the Bible compares and contrasts gifts and wages. God gives you a free gift versus sin pays you wages. One of them you have to work for, and it's sin. It's sin. Why do people not want to convert? Why do people not want God's free gift of salvation? Because they would rather work for the wages of sin. A gift is not something you earn. You don't go to a kid's birthday party and then make them mine coal for an hour before you give them their John Cena action figure. That's not the way it works. It's a gift. A gift is graciously given by the giver to be received with zero recompense required. I told y'all last week that this lesson's more preachy than it is anything else. So that is to say that a gift is something that you paid for that you wanted someone else to have for free. I'm giving you all kinds of lessons right here, Mike. You're just getting all kinds of good ones. Something that you paid for that you gave to someone else for free. They didn't work for it. They did not work for it. If you have to earn a gift through faith, then it's not a gift. It's a wage. It's a wage. Me and Faith will argue a lot. She has some family that lives up north that there's at least one of them left that is a very devout Catholic, but she gets kind of gone to and fro. She's at like a Pentecostal Catholic church now, like Catholics speaking in tongues. I don't know how that works. I don't understand that because I thought that the Mass was very structured, but okay. And maybe they're having too much communion. I don't know, but she will argue with me all the time, and I will tell her that there are points where I will concede. I've spoken with, I've had Catholic friends and spoken with them, and we've aired our differences, and I do believe that they are believers. But at the same time, there's concessions that I cannot make, and number one is going to be the Lord's Supper and the Eucharist. I mean, our folks died for that 500 years ago. And two is that the works righteousness. I can't. Number three would probably be the tokens and the relics, but that's Eastern Orthodoxy focuses more on that. That's one of those concessions we talked about. But anyway, we're not in that. We're not in there. We're talking about faith. We're talking about faith. We're not talking about differences. So it can be surmised that faith is a gift given from God. If you're still not convinced, let me read Romans 12:3. For the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you not to think more highly of himself than he ought to think. We talked about that earlier. But to think as to have sound judgment. Here it is. Here's the Hail Mary. There it is. As God has allotted to each a measure of faith. So, in plain terms, right there, it literally says that God has assigned different measures of faith to different people. So God literally measures it out and gifts it himself. I don't know how to make this argument any farther. Yeah, I do. I've got one more point. So I'll go a little bit farther and say that God has designed the Greek language. This is just my 2 cents. This is not verified by anyone. This is just what I think as I was studying this, is I think that God went so far, remember I'm big on sovereignty, that he designed the Greek language in such a way that the neutral article can point back to the entire preceding clause. So that is to say, that's a fancy way of saying that the gift of God is faith. That the gift of God is grace. That the gift of God is the salvation. So saved, gift. By grace, gift. Through faith, gift. That's just me. Don't quote me there. The early church fathers says it points back to faith. I think that it can hit the whole clause, but I don't get paid big dollars for this. All of it's from God, outside of yourself, but that's just extra. So now we've learned that faith comes from God and that God is sovereign in salvation. Let's see, it's 10:30. They're about to ring the bell. We'll stop there. And then in 2 weeks, we'll talk about the cost of faith and the power of faith. We'll be back in Hebrews 11 and then Mark 10. That's the story of the young ruler. My goodness. Really, they're aggressive today. So the fact is that whenever you think of your salvation, I didn't expect to be so soteriological today, but we are. When you think about your salvation, the thing that will keep you humble, because Paul, he said that he was given a thorn in the flesh to stay humble. I say, let's just be humble from the get-go, and we don't have to have a thorn. I don't know what his thorn was. It was left ambiguous, but whatever it was, it caused him a lot of grief. We don't need that. Let's just be humble from the get-go. But when you think of your salvation, one of the things that'll keep you humble is knowing it wasn't you. You were called, you were chosen. God picked you. God saved you. God did the whole process. So you know that it was done right.